The autumn rain had stopped just before sunset, leaving the city washed clean beneath soft amber lights. Glass towers reflected the fading sky, while people in tailored suits crossed polished sidewalks with quiet confidence. By the time the charity gala opened its doors, the streets outside had become little more than shimmering reflections beneath the evening glow. Inside the historic ballroom, warm music drifted through crystal chandeliers. Gentle conversations mixed with the soft clink of glasses, creating the kind of elegant noise that somehow made silence feel even heavier. Owen Carter stood near one of the tall windows, holding two untouched glasses of sparkling water. He had never liked crowded rooms. His dark navy suit fit perfectly, though he felt as if he had borrowed someone else's life for the evening. Around him, strangers laughed with effortless ease. They seemed to know exactly where to stand, what to say, and how loudly to smile. Owen knew none of those things. Instead, he watched the rainwater slide down the window outside. It reminded him that quiet things always kept moving, even when nobody noticed. Graham Brooks had asked him to come. That alone had been enough. Earlier that afternoon, Graham had called from the hospital. "I'm so sorry," he had said, exhaustion hiding beneath his calm voice. "An emergency surgery came in. I'll be late, but I promise I'll get there." Owen had smiled into the phone even though Graham couldn't see it. "I'll wait." "You always do." There had been something almost fragile in Graham's voice before the call ended. Owen didn't mind waiting. He had spent much of his life waiting. Waiting for people to understand him. Waiting for someone to stay. Waiting for the fear inside his chest to become something smaller than hope. 3 years earlier, another man had promised forever. Instead, he had chosen silence whenever their relationship became inconvenient. Private affection. Public distance. Eventually, Owen learned that being someone's secret could feel lonelier than being alone. Since then, quiet had become both his shelter and his prison. Tonight, however, felt different, because Graham had never treated him like something to hide. Even when they first met while volunteering at a neighborhood community shelter, Graham had never rushed conversations. Some evenings they spoke for hours. Other evenings they walked side by side without saying anything at all. Oddly enough, those silent walks became Owen's favorite memories. Silence sounded different beside someone who truly saw him. The ballroom doors opened again. More guests entered, laughing together. Owen glanced toward the entrance out of habit. Not Graham. He checked his phone. No new message. "It's fine," he whispered to himself. The words felt steady enough. Across the room, several donors gathered around a polished marble table. Their conversations carried easily through the music. One of them noticed Owen standing alone. Mason Reed. He was well known among the city's business leaders. Successful, confident, the kind of man who could fill an entire room simply by deciding to speak louder than everyone else. Mason followed Owen with curious eyes. "Know him?" one guest quietly asked. Mason shook his head. "No idea." Another person shrugged. "Maybe someone's assistant." The group chuckled softly. Owen wasn't trying to overhear. The ballroom simply wasn't large enough to hide every whisper. He lowered his eyes toward the sparkling water in his hands. A familiar ache settled inside him. Not anger. Just the old feeling of never quite belonging. Mason excused himself from the group. With an easy smile, he walked toward Owen. His polished shoes barely made a sound against the marble floor. Owen noticed him only when he stopped a few feet away. "Evening," Mason said warmly. "Good evening. You look like you're waiting for someone." "I am." Mason glanced at the untouched glasses. "Hopefully they don't keep you waiting too long." "I don't mind." For a brief moment, the conversation felt harmless. Then several of Mason's friends wandered closer. One nudged him playfully. "So who have you found hiding over here?" Mason laughed. He looked back at Owen with a grin that was probably meant to entertain everyone except the person standing in front of him. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he joked. "Lose your date." A few nearby guests laughed politely. Not loudly. Just enough. Enough for Owen to hear. Enough for the room to suddenly feel much larger than before. The word settled heavily inside him. Sweetheart. Years ago, it had been spoken with kindness. Later, it became something people used to make him feel smaller. His fingers tightened around the glass. He forced a polite smile. I'm just waiting. Relax, Mason said casually. We're only teasing. Owen nodded. I know. But he wasn't sure Mason knew, because sometimes people remembered the joke, and sometimes someone else remembered the wound. Before anyone could say another word, the ballroom entrance opened once more. Several heads turned. A tall man stepped inside wearing a charcoal suit beneath a rain-damp overcoat. His shoulders carried the unmistakable weariness of someone who had spent the day saving lives instead of attending parties. Graham Brooks. His eyes searched the room only once before finding Owen. Relief softened his expression immediately. Then he noticed the circle of strangers around him. He had heard only the last sentence. Only teasing. Graham crossed the ballroom with calm, measured steps. There was nothing dramatic about the way he moved. No raised voice. No visible anger. Only quiet certainty. He stopped beside Owen without hesitation. His gaze briefly met Owen's before turning toward Mason. Is there a problem here? Graham asked gently. The laughter disappeared. No one answered. For the first time that evening, the room seemed to understand something it had missed only moments before. Owen looked at Graham, feeling the familiar warmth that had slowly rebuilt every broken corner of his heart over the past 3 years. No one in that ballroom realized the man standing beside him wasn't simply his date. He was the person quietly holding the heart Owen had almost given up on trusting again. For several long seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. The soft music continued, but the conversations nearby faded into uneasy whispers. Graham stood beside Owen with the same quiet confidence he carried into every hospital room. He did not raise his voice. He did not glare. He simply rested one hand lightly against Owen's back, as though reminding him he was no longer standing alone. Mason cleared his throat. There isn't any problem, he replied, forcing an uneasy smile. We were only making conversation. Graham nodded politely. I'm glad to hear that. His calm response somehow carried more weight than anger ever could. Owen felt the tightness in his chest loosen a little. Graham had always been like this. He never fought to prove himself. He simply stood where he believed he belonged. And tonight, he had chosen to stand beside Owen. One of the event organizers approached with a welcoming smile. Dr. Brooks, we're so happy you made it. I'm sorry I'm late, Graham answered. The hospital needed me. The organizer nodded with understanding before turning toward Owen. And you must be. Before Owen could answer, Graham smiled. This is Owen Carter. There was a small pause. Then Graham added, with quiet pride, my partner. The single word settled over the group like gentle rain. No announcement. No performance. Just truth. Several guests smiled warmly. Others exchanged surprised glances. Mason's confident expression disappeared for the first time that evening. He looked at Owen differently now. Not because Owen had changed, but because he had finally realized he had judged someone without knowing anything about him. The organizer welcomed them both before leading Graham towards several donors waiting nearby. As they walked away, Graham leaned closer. Are you all right? Owen offered a faint smile. I am now. Graham searched his face carefully. You don't have to pretend with me. I know. That answer seemed enough. For now. Later that evening, while speeches filled the ballroom, Owen found himself drifting into memories. 3 years earlier, he had never imagined standing beside someone like Graham. Back then, Saturday mornings belonged to the community shelter on Maple Street. Owen had volunteered because the building needed repairs. Designing spaces had always been easier than understanding people. He expected quiet work. Instead, he met Graham. The young doctor arrived carrying 3 heavy boxes of donated medical supplies. One box slipped from his arms before he reached the entrance. Bandages scattered across the sidewalk. Without saying a word, Owen knelt beside him. For several minutes, they gathered supplies in comfortable silence. Finally, Graham smiled. I suppose that's one way to introduce myself. Owen laughed softly. surprised both of them. "I'm Graham." "Owen." "Thank you." It wasn't much. It was enough. Those simple words stayed with Owen long after that morning ended. The following weeks became strangely familiar. Every Saturday they volunteered together. Sometimes Graham treated patients in the shelter's small medical room while Owen repaired broken furniture or painted classrooms. Their conversations grew naturally, never forced, never rushed. One rainy afternoon, Graham found Owen sitting alone on the back steps after everyone else had gone home. "You always stay until the end." Owen shrugged. "I like making sure everything's finished. You don't have to carry everything yourself." Owen looked toward the empty parking lot. "I've gotten used to it." Graham didn't ask why. That quiet respect meant more than curiosity ever could. Instead, he sat beside Owen. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The rain tapped gently against the roof overhead. For the first time in years, Owen realized silence could feel peaceful instead of lonely. Months passed. Their friendship settled into something steady. Coffee after volunteering. Evening walks through the Riverside Park. Bookstores where neither felt pressured to speak. Sometimes Graham would recommend novels. Other times Owen would point out old buildings and explain why they had survived generations while newer ones slowly disappeared. "You notice things most people miss," Graham once told him. Owen smiled. "Only because I spend more time looking than talking." "I'm glad you do." That answer stayed with him for days. One winter evening, snow covered the sidewalks in a soft white blanket. The power failed inside the shelter. Everyone gathered around battery lanterns until repairs were finished. Children laughed while volunteers served hot soup. One little girl climbed into Owen's lap during story time. She looked toward Graham. "Is he your best friend?" Owen froze. Before he could answer, Graham smiled gently. "I hope so." The little girl nodded with complete certainty. "I can tell." Afterward, as they walked to their cars beneath falling snow, Owen finally spoke. "You answered that quickly. It was true. What if I hadn't felt the same?" Graham looked toward the quiet street. "I would have waited." That single sentence changed something inside Owen. No pressure. No expectations. Just patience. No one had ever offered him that before. The memory slowly faded as applause filled the ballroom once again. Owen blinked, returning to the present. Across the room, Graham had finished speaking with several donors. Their eyes met. Graham smiled. Not the polished smile he gave strangers. The smaller one. The real one. The one meant only for Owen. He crossed the room carrying 2 fresh glasses of sparkling water. "I noticed yours melted." Owen laughed quietly. "You remembered." "I remember most things about you." His cheeks warmed. "You always say things like that when nobody's listening." "I'd say them if the whole room were listening." Owen lowered his eyes. "You make that sound easy." "It isn't." Graham reached gently for his hand beneath the table, hidden from the crowd. "It's simply worth it." Nearby, Mason watched the moment unfold. His earlier joke echoed painfully inside his own thoughts. He had mistaken silence for weakness. Yet the quiet man before him possessed something far stronger than confidence. He had someone who chose him openly. Someone who stayed. For the first time in years, Mason wondered whether success meant anything at all if no one looked at him the way Graham looked at Owen. Sometimes kindness left deeper marks than humiliation ever could. Because kindness gave people nowhere to hide from themselves. And as the evening continued beneath warm golden lights, none of them realized the hardest conversations were still waiting just beyond the ballroom doors. The charity gala ended beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. Guests slowly drifted toward waiting cars, their conversations lingering in the cool evening air. Inside the ballroom, workers folded tablecloths and gathered empty glasses. The warmth of the celebration faded into peaceful silence. Owen and Graham walked toward the parking lot together. Neither of them hurried. Their hands brushed once before Graham gently reached for Owen's fingers. "You've been quiet," Graham said. "I know. Do you want to talk?" Owen looked across the sleeping city. Not tonight. Graham nodded. Then we'll wait until you're ready. There it was again. Patience. It always seemed to arrive before questions. By the following afternoon, short video clips from the gala had appeared online. Someone had recorded the moment Graham calmly stepped beside Owen. The videos spread farther than anyone expected. Comments poured in. Many praised Graham for standing beside his partner without hesitation. Others admired Owen's quiet composure. Friends from the shelter sent warm messages. Former co-workers congratulated them. But every kind message carried another reminder. People were watching. Owen had spent years trying not to be noticed. Now strangers discussed him as though they already knew his story. He closed his phone and placed it face down on the kitchen table. Graham noticed. You don't have to read any of it. I thought I could. And? Owen gave a tired smile. It feels like everyone suddenly has an opinion. Graham poured 2 cups of coffee before sitting beside him. The people who matter already know who you are. I wish believing that were easier. It will be. You always sound certain. I'm certain about you. Owen looked away before the warmth in his eyes became too obvious. That evening brought memories he had tried to leave behind. Years before meeting Graham, another relationship had slowly taught Owen to disappear. His former boyfriend had smiled warmly whenever they were alone. He spoke about future vacations, shared apartments, growing old together. But outside those private moments, everything changed. At restaurants, Owen became just a friend. At family gatherings, he was introduced as a coworker. When strangers asked questions, the answers always became smaller. Eventually, Owen had stopped asking for honesty. One rainy afternoon, he finally realized he was loving someone who feared being seen beside him. Walking away had broken his heart. Staying would have broken something even deeper. The memory still carried weight. Not because he missed that relationship, because he remembered the loneliness. Over the next week, Graham noticed small changes. Owen answered questions with fewer words. He stayed awake later than usual. Books remained unopened beside the bed. Several times Graham found him standing quietly by the apartment window long after midnight. One evening Graham joined him. The city looks different tonight. It does. What are you thinking about? Owen hesitated. Old things. You don't have to carry them alone. I know. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Several days later, Owen received an unexpected phone call. The name surprised him. Mason Reed. Owen almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. Hello. Owen. Thank you for picking up. His voice sounded different, less confident. I've been hoping we could meet. Owen remained silent. I owe you an apology, Mason continued. A real one. After a long pause, Owen agreed. They chose a quiet cafe overlooking the river. The afternoon was peaceful. Small boats drifted across calm water while autumn leaves floated beneath the bridge. When Mason arrived, he looked nothing like the polished businessman from the gala. He appeared tired, almost nervous. I'm glad you came, Mason said. I wasn't sure I should. You probably shouldn't have. Owen appreciated the honesty. For several moments, neither touched their coffee. Finally, Mason spoke. I've replayed that night more times than I can count. Owen listened quietly. I embarrassed you. You did. I told myself it was harmless. It wasn't. Mason lowered his eyes. I know that now. Another silence settled between them. Unlike the ballroom, this silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply asked both men to be truthful. I grew up believing the loudest person controlled every room, Mason admitted. My father respected confidence. He smiled sadly. So I learned to joke before anyone could judge me first. Owen watched him carefully. Sometimes jokes become shields. They do. And sometimes they become weapons. Mason nodded. I never meant to hurt you. I believe that. But intention doesn't erase pain. No. It doesn't. For the first time, Mason looked relieved. Not because he had been forgiven, because someone had finally answered him honestly. Across town, Graham finished an unexpectedly difficult shift at the hospital. One of the nurses mentioned seeing Owen near the River Cafe earlier that afternoon. Wasn't he meeting someone? Graham smiled politely. I think so. But uncertainty quietly followed him home. When he arrived at the cafe district, he noticed Owen through the window. Mason sat across from him. Both men appeared serious. Neither was smiling. Graham stopped walking. He wasn't jealous. Not exactly. He simply realized he knew nothing about the meeting. For a brief moment, an unfamiliar fear entered his thoughts. Had Owen felt unable to tell him? Had he missed something important? Inside the cafe, Owen looked toward the window. Their eyes met instantly. His expression brightened. He stood. Graham. But Graham gently lifted one hand. I'll wait outside. His voice remained calm. Still, something inside it felt distant. Owen hurried after him moments later. You weren't supposed to find out like this. Find out what? I only came because Mason wanted to apologize. Graham searched his face. I know you wouldn't hide something to hurt me. But I wish you had told me. Owen looked down. I wasn't sure it mattered. It matters because it matters to you. Neither man raised his voice. Neither walked away. Yet the space between them suddenly felt wider than the city itself. For the first time since they had met, they stood together without knowing how to cross the silence between them. And Owen realized that even the strongest love could tremble when old wounds were left unspoken. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rain gathered softly against the windshield, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and silver. Graham kept both hands on the steering wheel. Owen sat beside him, watching the familiar streets pass in silence. Normally, their quiet moments felt comforting. Tonight, the silence carried questions. When they reached the apartment, Graham unlocked the door and stepped inside. He switched on the small lamp beside the bookshelf instead of the bright ceiling lights. The warm glow settled over the room, making it feel safe despite the uncertainty between them. I'll make some tea, Graham said gently. Owen nodded. He watched Graham move through the kitchen with practiced ease. The kettle began to hum, filling the apartment with a familiar sound. It reminded Owen of dozens of evenings they had shared after long days. Some memories were built from extraordinary moments. The strongest ones came from ordinary nights like this. Graham placed 2 steaming mugs on the coffee table before sitting across from Owen. I don't want today to become something we avoid, he said quietly. I don't either. Then tell me what you're carrying. Owen wrapped both hands around his mug. The warmth reached his fingers but not the ache inside his chest. I thought I had buried it, he admitted. What? The past. Graham remained silent, giving him space to continue. Owen took a slow breath. When Mason called me sweetheart at the gala, everyone else heard a joke. His voice trembled. I heard every moment I spent pretending I didn't matter. Tears gathered in his eyes, but he didn't look away. My former boyfriend used to call me that when we were alone. He smiled sadly. It sounded beautiful then. His shoulders lowered. But whenever other people were around, I became invisible. Graham listened without interrupting. He was afraid someone might discover we were together, Owen continued. So every introduction became another lie. He swallowed hard. I kept telling myself love required patience. Another tear slipped down his cheek. It took me far too long to realize love should never require disappearing. The room grew completely still. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, years of hidden pain finally found words. Graham crossed the space between them and sat beside Owen. Without speaking, he reached for Owen's hand. I wish I'd known, he whispered. I didn't know how to tell you. You never had to earn the right to tell me. Owen lowered his head. I was afraid. Of me? No. A faint smile appeared through the tears. Of losing what we have. Graham's expression softened. Owen. I kept thinking if you saw how broken those memories still made me, you'd eventually grow tired. Graham gently shook his head. I've spent my life treating injuries people could see. He squeezed Owen's hand. The invisible ones deserve just as much care. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The apartment no longer felt heavy, felt honest. Finally, Graham smiled. Do you remember the first snowfall after we met? Owen laughed quietly through his tears. You asked if I thought we were best friends. And you looked terrified. I was. I wasn't asking for an answer. I know. I only wanted you to know I'd still be there whenever you found one. Owen looked at him. You've always stayed. I always will. Those words settled into Owen's heart more gently than any promise he had ever heard. A week later, another charity event brought many of the same guests together. This time, the atmosphere felt different. People greeted Owen warmly. Not because of the videos, because they had taken time to know him. Mason stood near the stage, waiting nervously. When the evening's presentations ended, he stepped toward the microphone. I'd like to say something. The room quieted. Mason looked directly at Owen. A few weeks ago, I made a joke at someone else's expense. His voice remained steady. I convinced myself it was harmless. He paused. It wasn't. Several guests exchanged glances. I judged someone before learning his story. He smiled sadly. Owen, I'm sorry. The apology was simple. There were no excuses. No attempts to soften what had happened. I've spent years believing strength meant speaking the loudest. He looked around the room. You taught me that real strength often speaks the softest. The ballroom remained silent. Not from discomfort, from respect. Owen stood slowly. He walked toward Mason. Every step felt lighter than the last. When he reached him, he offered a small smile. I accept your apology. Mason looked surprised. You do? I do. After everything? Owen nodded. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. He glanced toward Graham. It simply means I don't want pain deciding who I become. For the first time that evening, Mason smiled with genuine gratitude. Thank you. Later that night, Owen and Graham stepped outside onto the quiet terrace overlooking the city. The air carried the scent of fresh rain. Lights shimmered below like scattered stars. Graham slipped his hand into Owen's. You know, he said softly, people probably think I was protecting you that night. Owen smiled. Weren't you? Maybe. He looked into Owen's eyes. But they never realized something. What? You've been protecting me too. Owen frowned gently. How? You reminded me that kindness isn't weakness. Graham smiled. You've made me braver simply by trusting me. Owen felt emotion rise in his chest once again. For years, he believed love meant proving he deserved to stay. Now he finally understood. Real love stayed first, and helped both people heal afterward. They stood together beneath the quiet sky, saying nothing for several peaceful minutes. This time, silence no longer carried fear, carried understanding. And for the first time in many years, Owen realized the safest place he had ever known wasn't a building or a city. It was the hand holding his own. A year passed more quietly than either of them expected. There were no dramatic headlines. No grand declarations that changed everything overnight. Healing never arrived with fireworks. It arrived in ordinary mornings. The apartment slowly filled with the small habits they had built together. Graham still woke before sunrise on most workdays, leaving the soft aroma of fresh coffee drifting through the kitchen. Owen usually followed a few minutes later, still wrapped in sleep, smiling the moment he saw the second mug already waiting. It had become their unspoken ritual. Neither of them needed to ask. Love had learned the language of small things. On Saturday mornings, they still volunteered at the community shelter where they had first met. The building looked brighter now, thanks to months of renovations led by Owen. The walls carried cheerful colors chosen by children who visited after school. The shelter had become more than a place. It had become home to many people searching for a second chance. One afternoon, A teenage volunteer struggled to organize donated books. Owen walked over with a warm smile. Need a hand? I've been trying for 20 minutes, the teenager admitted with an embarrassed laugh. Owen knelt beside him. They don't have to be perfect. They don't. No. He carefully placed another novel onto the shelf. They just need someone willing to care. Across the room, Graham watched quietly. One of the older volunteers noticed him smiling. You still look at him the same way. Graham chuckled softly. I think I always will. What makes him so special? Graham looked toward Owen, who was patiently helping the young volunteer without seeking attention. He reminds people they matter. The older volunteer nodded thoughtfully. That's rare. It is. Outside the shelter, autumn returned once again. Golden leaves danced across the sidewalk exactly as they had the year before. Owen and Graham walked side by side toward a nearby bookstore. It had become another tradition. Every month they each chose one novel for the other to read. Sometimes they discussed every chapter. Sometimes they simply enjoyed reading together in comfortable silence. The owner greeted them warmly. My favorite couple is back. Owen smiled without hesitation. Those words no longer frightened him. He no longer searched the room to see who might be listening. He no longer wondered whether someone would ask him to hide. He simply accepted the happiness offered to him. That alone felt like a miracle. Not everyone from the gala disappeared from their lives. Mason kept his promise to change. He began volunteering at the shelter once a week, quietly helping wherever he was needed. At first, many people recognized him as the successful businessman from television interviews. But inside the shelter, nobody cared about expensive suits or important titles. Everyone carried boxes. Everyone swept floors. Everyone served meals. One evening, Mason approached Owen while stacking donated blankets. I've been meaning to ask you something. Owen looked up. What is it? Do you think people can really change? Owen considered the question carefully. I think people change when they stop trying to protect their pride. Mason smiled faintly. I've had plenty of that. And now I'm learning something better. What? Humility. Owen extended another folded blanket toward him. It's a good place to begin. Mason accepted it with quiet gratitude. I don't expect everyone to forgive me. You shouldn't. But I'm grateful you gave me the chance to become someone different. Owen nodded. So am I. That winter, the shelter organized its annual holiday gathering. Families filled the rooms with laughter. Children decorated cookies while volunteers wrapped donated gifts. Music floated gently through the building. As the evening came to an end, the little girl who had once asked if Graham was Owen's best friend ran toward them. She was taller now, more confident. She smiled brightly. I remember you. Owen laughed. We remember you too. She looked from one of them to the other. Are you still together? Graham smiled. We are. I knew you would be. How? The little girl shrugged as though the answer were obvious. Because people who smile at each other like that don't usually let go. The innocence of her words left both men speechless. After she ran back to her family, Graham quietly reached for Owen's hand. Children have a way of seeing things clearly. They do. Later that evening, snow began falling outside. Large, gentle flakes covered the streets in white. Owen and Graham walked home beneath one umbrella, laughing whenever the wind pushed snow onto their coats. Halfway across the bridge overlooking the river, Graham stopped. The city shimmered beneath thousands of lights. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Graham turned toward Owen. Can I ask you something? You always can. A familiar smile appeared on Graham's face. Still holding my heart? Owen looked into the eyes that had never asked him to become someone else. The eyes that had waited, stayed, listened, forgiven, loved. He gently intertwined their fingers. Always. And yours? Owen smiled. You've been holding mine since the day we picked up those bandages outside the shelter. Graham laughed softly. I remember. I do too. The snow continued falling around them, wrapping the city in peaceful silence. Owen realized something that had taken years to understand. Betrayal had once convinced him that love meant hiding. Fear had whispered that silence was loneliness. But Graham had patiently rewritten both beliefs. Love was never about becoming invisible. It was about being fully seen, and discovering someone chose to stay anyway. They resumed walking, leaving two sets of footprints beside each other in the fresh snow. Neither knew what the future would bring. Life would still have difficult days. There would still be misunderstandings, long hospital shifts, unexpected losses, and moments of uncertainty. But they would face them together. Sometimes that was the greatest promise two people could make. Not forever. Just today. And then tomorrow. And then the day after that. One quiet step at a time. As the lights of home came into view, Owen looked at the place where healing had truly begun. Not a ballroom, not a crowded gala, but the steady presence of the man walking beside him. Some hearts were won with grand gestures. Others were healed by countless ordinary moments. His had been healed by both. And he would choose that love again and again for the rest of his life.